Let's begin by davening that the zchut of our learning should help to bring home the hostages, protect our soldiers, Yisrael, and all of the innocents, and bring a speedy end to this war.
Amen.
So I just wanted to start off today. It's too bad that Paul isn't here. It's something that he wasn't the only one, but he brought up. The Gemara we saw last week of Tana Debei Rabbi Ishmael talked about Gzera Shava of the Inui of Yom Kippur and the Inui of the Na'aram Urasa. So we pointed out that presumably Inui regarding Na'aram Urasa is not the same Inui as the Inui of Yom Kippur. Whereas Inui of Yom Kippur seems to mean, how do we usually translate it? No, to afflict oneself. And the Inui of the Na'aram Urasa seems to be sexual violation. But I just wanted to remind us that we had an earlier sugya where the Gemara was trying to determine why Tashmish Hamita is excluded, is one of the Inuyim on Yom Kippur, and the Gemara asked Tashmish Hamita the Ikra Inuyim and Nalan. This is at the end of Ayin Vav, Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, in the beginning of Ayin Zayin Amud Bet. So it goes through all of the Gemara went through all the Inuyim to try to find some kind of a scriptural basis for relating Inui to each of those particular things that are forbidden on Yom Kippur, aside from eating and drinking. So here it says Tashmish Hamita Inui Menalan. Where do I learn out that Tashmish Hamita is called Inui? And the first pasuk that's brought is from Breshit. It's what Lavan says to Yaakov when he makes his. Oh, here's Paul. When he makes his bris. Let's wait a minute for Paul to connect so that he can back from this quick review. Okay. All right. Paul, are you with us?
Yes. Something strange. They changed the interface?
Oh, does it look different?
Yeah.
Could be. They keep changing things, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
I was going to say maybe you're hearing voices, but that's just me.
No, that's okay. I know your voice.
So I actually started to address this.
It doesn't come from heaven. It comes through the internet.
It comes from electronic signals. So I was just addressing something that actually was of interest to you last week, which was that the Braita of Tana Debei Rabbi Ishmael made a Gzera Shava with the word Inui in the context of Yom Kippur and Inui in the context of Na'aram Urasa. And so the Na'aram Urasa, the Na'ara Ma'urasa.
Na'ara Ma'urasa. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So you said it's not the same, right? Because inui here means to afflict, and over there it means to violate sexually. So I just wanted to remind us that I said last week, I said, this would, to understand this a little bit better, we should go back earlier in the Gemara. So I'm going to remind us of this sugya that we did some time ago, where the Gemara says as follows: "Tashmisha mitad yikra inui min nalan." Here the Gemara wants to find the sources for each of the inuyim besides eating and drinking. Where in Tanakh do I see them referred to as as an inui? So how do I know that Tashmisha Mita is an inui? So the first source that's brought is Im Te'aned Benotai V'im Tikach Nashim. So there's an idea here that inui, right? So what is this? This is Lavan saying to Yaakov, making him swear that he won't be me'aneh his daughters, and he won't take other wives. So what's the inui here? So Gemara says, Im ta'aneh mitashmish, im tikach mitzarot. So Im ta'aneh mitashmish would mean what? To not fulfill his duty to have sexual relations with them. That would be the inui. As Rashi says, Im ta'aneh mitashmish lahashbit onatan. To stop having ona with them, to stop having sexual relations. So there is this relationship between inui as a kind of an affliction, as it relates to tashmish amita. So here, im ta'aneh benotai, the way the Gemara understands is that you would withhold sex from my daughters. And that seems to be the opposite.
That's the opposite, yes.
Seems to be the opposite. So the Gemara actually ultimately rejects this pasuk. We could do a quick review of the sugya here. But I think, and I don't think I said this at the time we were learning it, but I don't remember. It could be that Taneh here would be understood, it could be understood both ways. In other words, it could be understood as having sex or withholding sex. In the same way, we have certain other verbs in Hebrew that can mean one thing and its opposite. So,
actually,
like
it's something that happens across many languages. There's actually a term for a word like that. Contronym.
Do you remember what? It's a contronym. In fact, I forgot that. That's right. So we have other words like that in Hebrew, like liskol, right? Is to stone. So it can mean to stone, like to throw stones. It can also mean to take stones away. It can mean to withdraw stones. There are. I'm off the top of my head. I'm not thinking of any other ones, but there are other ones. So it occurred to me that this is worth pointing out.
Or to actually, back can mean both to cleave. It's like our English word to cleave can mean both to stick together and to split.
Yeah, so that works in English, not in Hebrew. But yes, that's a good example in English. The dabek in Hebrew only means to stick. It doesn't mean to separate. But in English, to cleave can mean, right, to set, like to cut apart or to stick together. Right, so what did the Gemara say? If you will withhold sex from them. That is, if you will take, that is, not to add on other wives so that they would have tzarot. What's a tzara? If you remember from when we learned this, or many of you other learning, what's a tzara?
A co-wife.
A co-wife. Tzara is a co-wife. So he's saying that you can't have any other wives besides besides my daughters. And so actually, I'm not going to go through this whole thing again. And the Gemara ultimately says, Amarle Rav Papa. Just a second. Says Amarle Rav Papa Labai Hatashmish Gufa Ikre Inui. Tashmish itself is called Inui. Right, this is Shem with Dina. It says that he's vetted her at Ina, right? Which means that he had sex with her. He had sexual relations with her. So that's called Inui. Marle Hatam Shinami Biyodacherot. So Abaye replies to Rav Papi, says that actually there Vayana means that he had not regular sex, not vaginal sex. He had anal sex with her. Is what it would refer
Shay,
to. Yes.
it's difficult to hear you.
You know what?
Maybe the other ones do, but
Wait, is that better?
yes, that's much better. Please.
Oh, okay. All right. I had a fan on, but I don't really need it, so I'll keep it off. Here also, again, without going through the details of the sugya, what I understand is that it refers to some kind of a sexual act. So inui can mean, and in this context, Chazal understood it to be a kind of a deviant sexual act that would be, and what is the Gemara trying to prove here? The Gemara is trying to prove that Tashmish Amita is called Inui. That's the important part of that's the important point of the sugya, that in both of these instances, Im Ta'aneh Benotai or Vaishkavot Vayana, that in the term Inui is associated with sex. So when I see later on in our sugya that we're in now, that Tana de Rabbi Yishmael said, "Ne'amar kan inui v'ne'amar lahalan inui, malahalan lo anash elim kain." He's here. Afkan lo anash elim kain. He's here, and he brings inui from al davar sher ina et eshet re'ehu. So again, it's in the ina here is in relationship to sex, but it's called it's the same root. It's the same from Chazal's point of view. It's the same word. It just has different meanings or different nuances in different contexts, but it's valid to use it as a basis for Gzeira Shava. I think I'll just leave it at that. I just wanted to point this out, that this isn't the first time that we saw that Inui in the context of sexual relations is called Inui and has implications for Inui on Yom Kippurim. So that was Tana de Rabbi Yishmael. And once again, here in our sugya, we're trying to, the Gemara is trying to find the basis in the Torah for an azhara for Inui on Yom Kippur. Inui meaning fasting on Yom Kippur is called Inui. And where does the Torah give us an azhara? So Tanit Rabbi Yishmael says, I learned it from Gzera Shava, from Inui of the Nahara Me'urasa. Now let's get to
The Inu is based on a lexical resemblance, not on the resemblance of the meaning.
Well, so what I'm trying to point out is it's not just lexical. In other words, it's not just that that the words resemble each other. There's a deeper connection here, which we see from. That's why I pointed out to the sugya earlier. In other words, the ona that's mentioned by Shem or by Lavan is associated with Inui that we see by Yom Kippur. So I think what it points to is that this word Inui has broader implications than just affliction. And in the case, let's say in the second case that the Gemara brought earlier that I just showed you, that Vaishkavota Vayaneha by Shem, so you could understand that as being a sexual affliction, right? That he wasn't the way Abai understands it. It's Vaishkavota Vayaneha. What's his point? That Vaye'aneh isn't an explanation of Vaishkavota. It's saying something more than Vaishkavota. There's two things. That first he was Shochevita, and then Vaye'aneh. So the Shochevita, that would be regular vaginal sex. And Vaye'aneh would be some other deviant form of sex, like anal sex. And that could be seen as affliction, but it's a sexual affliction.
But nevertheless, one of the Inuim is a physical Inui, and the other is, we call it Inui Nefesh. Initem et nafshotechem.
Yeah, so that's an important point. I agree that Chazal understand that Inui Nefesh means, in other words, the practical outcome of that is that you can't eat or drink. But the point that you're making,
which is a physical Inui, I understand this.
Right, that's an Inui, but the idea, but that we understand that that's Inui Nefesh. In other words, it's not just that you'll be hungry. It means that you won't. That it's a psychological burden, as we see, because what's the shiur for eating and drinking on Yom Kippur? It's enough to give you yishuv dat. That's the threshold. That's what tells you that you're no longer mitaneh. So inui nefesh is something. You're right. It points to something more than just refraining from something physical. It means that you are depriving yourself in such a way that your mind will be at a state of unrest. And it's also important to point out that when we looked with the earlier sugya that we were looking at now from Ayin Zion, all of the examples that the Gemara brings to try to associate Inui with Hashmi Shamita and Sicha and Rechitza and all of those things, excuse me, those are brought as apparently as asmachtot. I think very early on when we started doing the Gemara, I showed you the Ran at the beginning of the chapter where the Ran discusses whether or not these other Inuyim are Asur Dioraito or Drabanan. So I'm not going to relitigate that right now. You can go back and look at those earlier sugyot. But in principle, yes, the Chazal understood that the inui that the Torah is talking about is inui nefesh, v'zeh mitbateh al yedei miniah achila v'shtiya. Right? It's expressed through not eating and not drinking. So, but here, as to what we're talking about, so we had the Tana Debei Rabbi Ishmael. He said, I'm going to learn out the Azhara for Inui from Na'arama Urasa. And then we have this. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Omar, Yalif Shabbat Shabbaton me Shabbat Bereshit. Ma lahalan lo anash el imkain he's here. Afkan lo anash el imkain he's here. So, what's Rav Acha Bar Yaakov saying? How does he learn the Azhara for Inui on Yom Kippur?
He compares it to Shabbat Stam, the normal Shabbat.
So what is so the mech so he's saying I'm going to learn it out from Shabbat that happens every week, which we'll call Shabbat Bereshit. And what's the mechanism? The midrashic mechanism is also Gzeira Shabbat. It's the same mechanism that Tana Debei Rabbi Ishmael used, but he's using a different basis. So with Tana Debei Rabbi Ishmael, he's focusing on the word inui itself, which would seem to be, in a sense, more to the point. That is, I'm trying to find out the azhara for inui. So Tana Debei Rabbi Ishmael brings another example of inui that's asur, and that also that's asur, that has an azara and it has an onesh. So just like inui by Naram Urasa is both an azara and an onesh, so it's also true for inui nefesh on Yom Kippurim. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov makes a different Gzeira Shava. His Gzeira Shava is based on this idea that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat. So I'm gonna make a Gzeira Shava of Shabbat Shabbaton that's a description of Yom Kippurim, and I'll compare it to Shabbat Bereshit. So I know that Malahalan, just as over there by Shabbat Bereshit, Lo Anash Elim Kain he's here, the Torah didn't give us an onesh, except that it without also giving us an azara. So here also I'll make a Gzeira Shava that must be true as well. That applies as well to Inui on Yom Kippur. Let's just remind ourselves for a second of the verse. So we have this verse in the end, at the end of the first, right, the Parsha Nachremot that deals with Yom Kippur, Shabbat Shabbaton Hilachem, V'initem et nafshotechem. So the Gzeira Shava would tell me that Shabbat, that Inui Nefesh is asur, or is a requirement on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is called Shabbat. So since it's called Shabbat, I can now compare it to Shabbat Bereshit. So let's keep that in mind. Let's go back to the Gemara. Rav Papa says, "Hu gufe Shabbat ikre." It
I'm sorry,
itself. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I was just asking to switch the page back that you just did.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you what it is. I did before you asked, but I know from looking at the videos, I see it right away, but there's a little bit of a delay on your side. But it's fine. You should always mention it because sometimes it doesn't work or sometimes I forgot, so that's fine. Rav Papa Marhu Gufei Shabbat Igre. It itself is called Shabbat. Dichtiv Tishbetu Shabbatchem. So where does it say Tishbetu Shabbatchem? So so this is in Parshat Emor, where I also have a pasuk that starts Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem v'initem et nafshotechem v'tisha lachodesh ba'erev ve'erev ad erev tishbetu Shabbatchem. So now, what we're going to do, we're going to take a little time to understand the Gemara here and to understand what each of these drashot mean. So, Ravacha Bar Yaakov says, I'm going to learn Inui, I'm going to learn the Azara for Inui from Gzeira Shava. The Gzeira Shava is based on the pasuk of Shabbat Shabbaton. So, in that Yom Kippur is some kind of a Shabbat, but it's referred to as a Shabbat. I'm going to make a Gzeira Shava to Shabbat Bereshit. Rav Papa says it itself, Yom Kippur itself, is called Shabbat. So what's he trying to say? What does he mean that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat? What's he trying to prove, and how is he proving it?
Well, it goes back to trying to find the source for the Azara for Inui. So what he's saying is that you don't need to compare it to another verse. It is a Shabbat, and therefore, like all the other Shabbats, mentions of Shabbat in the Torah, there's an Azara.
Excellent, very good. In other words, he's saying, I don't need a Gzeira Shava. I don't need to say there's a pasuk here by Yom Kippur and another pasuk by Shabbat Bereshit. Yom Kippur is called Shabbat. Once I know that it itself is Shabbat, then it's like every other Shabbat, which is that just like the Torah says that if you violate Shabbat, you're chayav an onesh, and the Torah gave us an azhara for that as well as an onesh. So that azhara is built in to the isur of inui on Yom Kippur because it itself is Shabbat. It's not like Shabbat Bereshit. It is Shabbat, just like Shabbat Bereshit. So now let's take note that Ravacha Bar Yaakov, when he brought his Gzeira Shava, he brought it from these words, Shabbat Shabbaton. And Rav Papa brings it from Tishbetu Shabbatchem. So we might ask, what might we ask?
What does Rav Papa do with Shabbat Shabbaton?
Okay, so one thing is, what does he do with Shabbat Shabbaton, and what does Ravacha Bar Yaakov do with Tishbetu Shabbatchem? I would also say we could ask, it says Shabbat Shabbaton. Why doesn't Rav Papa just say Shabbat Shabbaton tells me that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat? Why does he have to bring a different pasuk altogether? Now, the Gemara doesn't ask that directly, but we're going to see Why? Because yes, the Gemara goes on to say, Bishlama Rav Papa lo amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, dikra dichtiv begufei adif. So the Gemara says, Bishlama, it goes well for Rav Papa that he didn't say like Rav Acha bar Yaakov, because dikra dichtiv begufei, a pasuk that is written about the body of the matter. It's written about the matter itself. Adif, that's preferable. What does it mean that it's what is the Gemara trying to say? What's the pasuk that's written about the body of the matter?
The pasuk that Rav Papa is using is the Tishbatu Shabbatchem. And so it's better to learn it from there rather than with a darash, with a Gezer Shama.
Yeah, in other words, it's adif to learn it from the thing itself. That is, so this is an interesting thing, which now we learn. Agav, we learn as a kind of on the side that let me just finish my sentence. Let me finish my sentence and then say what you want to say. That the Gemara is telling us that, that all of these times that we're relying on drashot, so we rely on them when we don't have something that's direct. And so here, until now, the Gemara's been relying on drashot of various kinds, mainly Gzeira Shava, and the Gemara is saying Rav Papa's approach is better than Gzeira Shava because he's telling us that the Torah is just saying directly about Yom Kippur that it is Shabbat. So that tells you something about the nature of drush, that the direct understanding is always going to be superior to a drush, which is in a sense like a step removed. Michael, what did you want to say?
So, so just to make sure that so what makes this, gufo is what part of what makes Tishbatu the gufo is that it actually has it commands an action. Tishbatu, as opposed to Shabbat.
That's an interesting point, but that's not what the Gemara means right now. However, that point the point you're making is going to come into play. So you're making an important observation, which is Rav Acha bar Yaakov is basing his drasha on Shabbat Shabbaton, which is just a description, and Rav Papa is basing it on Shabbat Chem. It is your Shabbat, and it's preceded by a command, Tishbatu Shabbat Chem. That's the observation that you're making. That's an important observation. But when the Gemara says, Dikra dichti begufei adif, a pasuk that's talking about the body of the matter, the meat of the matter, that's better, meaning, like Michael Schwartz said, that's better than Gzeira Shava. So what's better than Gzeira Shava? The Rav Papa says that Yom Kippur itself, the gufo, it itself is Shabbat. That's all the Gemara means right now. But you'll hold on to your thought because it's going to be important. So that's why Rav Papa doesn't say like Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Because Rav Acha bar Yaakov wants to make a Gzeira Shava, Rav Papa wants to learn it without a Gzeira Shava. He wants to learn it from Yom Kippur itself. That Yom Kippur itself is called Shabbat. It means it has this aspect of Shabbat, which has a built-in azhara. My ta'ama lo amar el Rav Acha bar Yaakov, my ta'ama lo amar Rav Papa. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who learns the Gzeira Shava, why didn't he say like Rav Papa? In other words, you see the Gemara starts off this way because Rav Papa is seemingly the more obvious choice. It's adif. His is better than Gzeira Shava. So that should be our default position. So we understand why Rav Papa wouldn't say like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. But now that we know that, why doesn't Rav Acha Bar Yaakov say like Rav Papa? So my time alo amar Rav Papa mebaile, he needs it. Lichaditanya, he needs it. What does he need? What's the it?
That pasuk.
Which pasuk?
Pasuk of Rav Papa, the Shavtem, Tishmatu Shavatechem.
Very good. The reason Rav Acha Bar Yaakov doesn't say like Rav Papa is because he needs that pasuk to learn something else. So he can't use it for the limud of Rav Papa. So what does he need it for? So he needs it for the following drasha. V'initem et nafshotechem b'tish'a l'chodesh. All right. So this is the pasuk that we saw at the end of Parashat Emor. Yachol yatchil v'yitaneh b'tisha. So it could be once the Torah says Yinitim et nafshotechem b'tish'a l'chodesh, that you have to be mitaneh nefesh on the 9th of the month. It could be that means you have to start your inui nefesh on the 9th and not on the 10th. Talmud Lamar ba'erev, right? That's the hemshech of the pasuk. V'initem et nafshotechem b'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev. That's the next word. I ba'erev yachol mishetech shach. So if it's in the evening, in other words, if the Torah tells me that you have to do inui nefesh in the evening, then I would say it means from the time it gets dark. Why would I say ba'erev means the time it gets dark?
It's Erev. It's nighttime.
It's nighttime. So I'm also pushing you a little bit. How do I know that Erev is the time that it gets dark and not earlier? It's a pasuk that everybody knows.
Boker Yoma Shishi, or you were whatever.
Right. It's a pasuk that it's the Vahi Erev Vahi Boker Yom, right? So I know that Erev is the nighttime and the daytime. So Erev in that context means after it got dark. It means nighttime. The reason I want to point that out is because, well, you'll see, it has to do with the way the drasha works here, but also because the word Erev is a funny word, right? Erev means, in this context, the drasha is saying it means at night. But I also know that, let's say, Erev, when is Erev Yom Kippur?
On the 9th.
On the 9th. In other words, what we call Erev Yom Kippur is actually before nighttime. It's the day before. And the word itself, Erev, is from the word la'arev, which means to mix. It alludes to this. It alludes to the idea of dusk. It's the idea that daytime and nighttime are mixing. So erev is a word that we would think would refer to a time that's not necessarily at night. But here, the Braita that we're quoting is telling me that Erev in this context actually means at night, right? So Yinitem et nafshotechem b'tisha l'chodesh yachol yatchil v'yitaneh b'tisha, because that's what it says, b'tisha l'chodesh. Talmud Lamar ba'erev. Iba erev yachol misha techshach. So the Bright is saying that once the Torah introduced the word erev, then why does it say be'erev? Erev in this context must mean from the time it gets dark. Iba erev yachol misha techshach. However, Talmud lomar b'tisha. That's the next word. Unitem of nafshatechem b'tisha l'chodesh be'erev. I'm sorry, that's the earlier word. Be'erev Talmud lomar b'tisha. Ha-ketzad. So how does that work? How can it be that I have to be mitaneh only from the nighttime, because it says be'erev, but it also says I have to be mitaneh on the 9th. So it's like a contradiction, mineu be, right? It contradicts itself. Ha-ketzad matchil mitaneh mibod yom. So how does that work? It means that you have to begin the inui, in other words, you have to start fasting mi be'od yom, while it is still day. That is, in order to fulfill this pasuk, v'nitem nafshaltechem b'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev, it means now you have to do both things. You have to do inui both on the 9th and mishatech shach. But because of the juxtaposition of Tisha Chodesh Ba'erev, I understand that it's not the whole day of the 9th. It means it's going to be a time that's close to the night. Mikan shemosifin mechol al kodesh. So from here, I learn that we add on from Chol, which is the 9th, to the Kodesh, which is the 10th. And we saw this drasha very briefly a few weeks ago. I showed you this is also quoted in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, where there's a machoka between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael about where I learned Tosefet Chol Mechodesh, Tosefet Chol Al Kodesh. Sorry, I'm a little out of it. Okay, so I still haven't found out what Rav Acha Bar Yaakov needs his pasuk of Tishbatu Shabbatchem yet, so we have to continue. Mikan shemosifin mechol al hakodesh ve'ein li ela b'kenisato b'yitziato minayin. I only have it in entering Yom Kippur. What don't I have except for entering into Yom Kippur?
Tosefet Yom Tov.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have this Tosefet for our. Very good. Both of those things. I don't have Tosefet Chol Al Kodesh for the purpose of, in our case, Inui Nefesh, except at the beginning of Yom Kippur, that tells me, because there the Torah said, B'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev. So I know that I have to start the Inui on the 9th and go into the 10th. B'yitziato minayin. And it's going out. In other words, when Yom Kippur is over, how do I know I have to add on there? Talmud Lamar, me'erev ad erev. Right, that's the hemshech of the pasuk. B'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev, me'erev ad erev, tishbatu shabbatchem. So once it says me'erev ad erev, that tells me that I'm adding from kodesh to chol also at the end. So how does that tell me that I'm adding at the end?
It's. I mean, the term Erev at the beginning would seem to imply the additional time as well as, and not just nightfall, but the time just before nightfall. And so therefore we'd assume that it also, is sort of that period of time afterwards.
Okay, so that seems to be what the Gemara wants to say. It's a little bit difficult because of what I said before, that in this context, the Braitis said earlier, Iba Erev Yachol Mishetech Shach. So what do we say? That the Gemara here is saying that maybe Erev in this context means only from the time it gets dark. So if it's only the time that it gets dark, then Me'erev ad Erev would mean from the time it gets dark until the time it gets dark. And it wouldn't have a Tosefet. You see what I'm saying? So something shifted. And I think what shifted is what I said what I said a little bit earlier, that the word Erev by itself would actually seem to refer can refer not just to the night. So wait, let me go back for a second. So I when we said this earlier, what did we say? And I said, what's the raya? What's the proof that Erev would mean night? So I could say it's from the pasuk of Erev Boker. And now I'm saying Me'erev ad Erev tells me that there's Tosefet Kodesh Mechol in the beginning and at the end. So it tells me something about Erev, that maybe Erev is more than, maybe it's a little bit before and a little bit after. So maybe what it's saying is as follows: You need to chodesh. Once the Gemara says Haketzad matchil mitanem ibod yom, so the way the Gemara understands, the way the Braita understands, is v'initem nafshotechem b'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev. B'tisha l'chodesh now informs me about what ba'erev means. In other words, if I only had ba'erev, I might think that it means only at night. But because the Torah says b'tisha l'chodesh ba'erev, that tells me that ba'erev in this context means more than just the absolute nightfall. Ba'erev means a little bit before. So if ba'erev means a little bit before here, I can say the assertion is going to be that I can say it means a little bit after at the end. That Erev itself is a squishy term, and it can mean it can be both ways. So it can add from earlier in the day into the nightfall, and it could add from the nightfall, from the time of night into from the moment of Tzeta Kochavim, it can add on even after that.
I mean, if it strikes me that the shoresh can refer to either a mixture or a boundary. And
You're thinking of Eruv.
Exactly.
Yeah, the reason, but Eruv doesn't mean boundary. I'll just tell you. It's an interesting idea. What does Eruv mean in the context of Eruvin? We have mentioned this earlier not recently. But why do we call an Eruv an Eruv? The Eruv doesn't refer to the boundary. What does it refer to?
It's a mixing of private and public domains.
Ah, right. Okay.
That's also not true. It's a mix. It is a mixing, but what's it a mixing of? So what's Eruv Chatzerot is when people who live in a common chatzer, they share a common courtyard. When they mix their food together, they pool their food and put it into one house. And because their food is in one house, it makes that courtyard as if it's owned by everybody and it becomes a Reshuta Yachid. So the Eruv there just means that you're pooling together food. So it's not mixing domains. It doesn't mean a boundary. It means that you're putting your food together. So that was an interesting idea. It just happened to be incorrect. Right? What's the quote? Another great
Another beautiful theory struck down by an inconvenient fact.
something like that.
Something like that.
Exactly. Okay. But nonetheless, I encourage you to make these contributions whenever you think that it might work. Okay, so what are we saying? Okay, so Yitziato Minayin. So at this point in the Braita, what have we learned? We've learned that there's Tosefet Chol al Kodesh Gam b'Knisa v'Gam b'Yitzia, both at the beginning and at the end of Yom Kippur in this case, and I extrapolate that. We'll extrapolate that in a moment. For the moment, we'll just say that I learned from this that I add Mechol al Kodesh both at the beginning and at the end of Yom Kippur, because that's the pasuk. Pasuk is talking about Yom Kippur. Then the Braita says, "Einli ele Yom Kippurim." So this proof that I have to Tosefet Chol Kodesh, I learned it out from this pasuk of Yom Kippur. So Einli ele Yom Kippurim. So you've showed me that I have to Tosefet Chol Kodesh just for Yom Kippur. Shabbatot minayin. Where do I learn out that there's Tosefet Chol Kodesh for Shabbat? Talmud Lomar Tishbetu, right? It's the himshech of that pasuk. The Tisha Chodesh me'erev ad erev Tishbetu. So the addition of the word Tishbetu tells me that it's going to be also for Shabbat. Ainli ela Shabbatot Yamim Tovim Minayin. So I only have Shabbos. In other words, I have Yom Kippur, but I also have Shabbos. What about other Yamim Tovim? Where do I learn that from? Talmud Lomar Shabbatchem. So if you think about it, so hold on a second. I'll just finish reading. HaKetzad. So how does that work? Kol makom shene'amar shvut mosifin mechol al hakodesh. So it's telling any time that the Torah tells me lishbot that there's a shvut, that means I have to add from chol al kodesh. So let's go back for a second and look at the pasuk again. Shabbat Shabbaton hilachem initem et nafshotechem b'tisha lechodesh be'erev me'erev ad erev tishbetu Shabbatchem. So what's the basis for darshaning tishbetu Shabbatchem? Why don't I just say it means that this is Yom Kippur and you should be shavet on Yom Kippur? What makes me think that this is talking about Shabbos and Yom Tov? What's the basis for that?
Is it because it already says Shabbat Shabbaton at the beginning of the pasuk?
So then I would say yes. I'd say Tishbetu Shabbatchem is superfluous. I don't need it. I already know that Yom Kippur is a Shabbat Shabbaton. Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem v'initem nafshotechem b'tisha lechodesh be'erev me'erev ad erev. I could have stopped right there. So Tishbetu Shabbatchem is superfluous. So if I say I learn out Shabbat from Tishbetu, how do I learn out Yomim Tovim from Shabbatchem? In other words, so Tishbetu is superfluous because I didn't need Tishbetu. I could have just said, I know that from Shabbat Shabbaton. So now I know it's not only referring to Yom Kippur, it's referring to Shabbos because it says Tishbetu. Tishbetu is superfluous. So if this is this idea of Im Eno Inyan, if it's not talking about Yom Kippur, I'll learn it for something else. So I'll learn it for any Shabbos. So how do I learn? So that tells me any Shabbos. How does Shabbatchem tell me that it's any Yom Tov? It's not that much different than what you just said a moment ago about Tishbetu Shabbatchem. That is,
Also
yeah,
superfluous then. It's also
it's also
superfluous.
superfluous. It's also superfluous because if I just wanted to include Shabbat and nothing else, I could have said Me'erev ad erev Tishbetu. Tishbetu would tell me that I'm Mosif Chol Kodesh for Shabbat. Shabbatchem is now that's superfluous. This is like, right? It's something I don't need at all. I already know that I know Yom Kippurim because that's the context, and Yom Kippurim is being called Shabbat Shabbaton here. Me'erev ad erev Tishbetu. Okay, so Tishbetu is superfluous. It tells me Shabbos. Shabbatchem is even more superfluous because what do you do when it says Tishbetu? So what does it mean to be lishbot? Of course, you're shovet on Shabbat. So Shabbatchem is superfluous. I don't need the Torah to say Shabbatchem. So on the basis of that, I'll say, so that's to be Mosif Yamim Tovim. So before we go on, let's also just consider for a moment. So now I have this is an interesting phenomenon. I have a pasuk that tells me a Mosif Chol Kodesh for Yom Kippur, for Shabbat, and Yom Tov. And each of those are a separate category. According to this drasha. How are they distinct? How is Yom Kippur Shabbat, or how are Yom Kippur Shabbat and Yom Tov distinct from each other? Why didn't I just say they're all called Shabbat and be done with it?
Because although they
Well, what are the mafyanim? You don't have to go too deeply into this. What are the characteristics that distinguish each of them from the other?
sort of different sets of restrictions.
So what are they?
For Shabbat, it's al malacha. I mean, for Yom Tov, it's malacha, except for ochel nefesh. And for Yom Kippur, it's al malacha plus all the prohibitions implied in Inui.
Plus Inui. Very good. So the point is, why am I pointing it out? Because the Breita understands that it's not muvan me'elav that what applies to one will apply to the other. So I might start off, the Torah starts off with Yom Kippur, which in a sense is the most chamur, because it's asur, like Michael Werner said, it's asur with all malacha. And in addition, it has another set of isurim, which are the inui nefesh. So that's very chamur. So I might say that the chumrah of Yom Kippurim is the basis for justifying Tosefet Chol Kodesh, Mashein Kain for Shabbos, which is only asur b'mlacha. So the pasuk tells me Shabbat Shabbaton Yom Kippurim So it means I have to sefer Chol Kodesh for Yom Kippur. Then it says Tishbetu, so it means I have to apply this also to Shabbat. But it's not Muvan Me'elav that I'm going to apply it to Yom Tov, which is even more kal than Shabbos. So since it's more kal, I might think there isn't a Tosefet. But it says, Torah says Shabbatchem. So you have to be Mosif Chol Kodesh Gam Yom Kippur, Gam Shabbat, Gam Yom Tov. Okay. Very good. Okay, so now I know why Rav Acha Bar Yaakov didn't say like Rav Papa, because he says, I need the drasha of Shabbat Tishbetu Shabbatchem to tell me Tosefet Chol al Kodesh. And that's why when I want to figure out the Gzeirish, when I want to figure out the Azhara for Inui on Yom Kippur, I'm going to learn it from a Gzeirish Shava from the words Shabbat Shabbaton. I can't learn it from Tishbetu Shabbatchem. So now the question is, the question that we alluded to earlier, which is, Rav Papa learns out that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat from Tishbetu Shabbatchem. So what's the difference? Why did he learn it from there and not learn it from the words of Shabbat Shabbaton? In other words, the Gemara could have asked, the Gemara doesn't ask this question, and not in any direct fashion, but the Gemara could have said this question, Rav Papa, why didn't you learn out that hu gufe Shabbat ikre from the words Shabbat Shabbaton? Why did I say that Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem is enough to tell me that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat? Why does he have to learn it out from the words Tishbetu Shabbatchem? So the Gemara doesn't ask this question, but Michael Werner alluded to this earlier. What's the difference between the Torah saying Shabbat Shabbaton and the Torah saying Tishbetu Shabbatchem?
One is a description, the other is an imperative.
So Tishbetu Shabbatchem is an imperative. The Tishbetu part is the imperative, and Shabbatchem is the description. Not the description, but it's the object, right? It's the object of that imperative. So Shabbat Shabbaton by itself is just telling me something descriptive. I can make this argument that it's not an imperative. Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem just tells me that it's a Shabbos, but that in itself may not tell me anything halachic per se, at least not in this context. So this is what Rashi is talking about. Let's look at Rashi. Papa Marhu Gufe Shabbat Ikre. Ha Gufe Shabbat Ikre. Uvelav Gzera Shava Nami Nafkamine Ube. And without the Gzera Shava, I would learn it out from it itself. The Kevan de Ikre Shabbat Liinyan Inui Havale Shabbat Laonesh V'Azhara. I'll say, since it's called Shabbat regarding Inui, then I could say it is Shabbat. It's like Shabbat for both Onesh and Azhara. Once again, because what's that pasuk which we've now said many times, Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem v'nitem et nafshotechem. The pasuk is specifically talking about inui nefesh on Yom Kippur, and it ends off by saying Tishbetu Shabbatchem. So the Rav Papa says, look, the Torah is telling me that what's the ribui of Tishbetu Shabbatchem? In other words, Tishbetu Shabbatchem was also superfluous for Rav Papa. But he's saying what it tells me is exactly this, that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat. How do I know it's called Shabbat? Because it says Tishbetu Shabbatchem, and it means in this context that this day of Yom Kippur must be Shabbat. Otherwise, I'd say Tishbetu Shabbatchem means keep Shabbos, but what does that have to do with the rest of the pasuk? The rest of the pasuk is talking about Inui Nefesh. So here it means that Tishbetu Shabbatchem, it tells me bimforash that when is there a chiyuv of Inui Nefesh? On Shabbos, on your Shabbos. So just right, so I'll know that it's Shabbos. Shabbos has both an onesh and an azara, so it means that Yom Kippur also has an onesh and azara. And now Rashi addresses this question we just asked. Tishbetu Shabbatchem, ume Shabbat Shabbaton lo gamar diikre Shabbat. So Rav Papa doesn't learn out from Shabbat Shabbaton that Yom Kippur is called Shabbat. Why? Shabbat Shabbaton is Shvut. All right, the Shvut there is in parentheses. I won't go into the parentheses, but the point is, like I reminded you last week that much earlier on in the Gemara, when the Gemara wanted to have a basis for the other Inuyim besides Achila and Shtiyah, that there was a drasha there that we learned it out from Shabbat Shabbaton. That Shabbat Shabbaton is a ribui, and it tells me that it's not just Shabbat, it's Shabbat Shabbaton. It means that that there's an implication that I'm adding on more than what is explicit in the pasuk. Just a second. Once again, so if I look at the pasuk, Shabbat Shabbaton kulachem v'initem et nafshotechem. So it's telling me there's a ribui of inuyim. We'll take it. We'll leave it at that. So that's Rashi's first answer to this question. Why doesn't Rav Papa learn out from Shabbat Shabbaton? Because he needs that pasuk for what the Gemara learned out earlier, that it tells me Sha'ar Inuyim, tells me the other Inuyim. That's the basis for the other Inuyim. Inami Shabbat Shabbaton he love Yoma Ikre Shabbat. Now I want to point out to you, this is a little tricky, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not sure I understand 100% what Rashi means here. So bear with me, and we'll maybe figure it out together. So there's two places where Yom Kippur is called Shabbat Shabbaton. Right? The first one is here in Achremot, and here it says Shabbat Shabbaton hi lachem. And then we have the pasuk that we just saw, Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem. So why the change? Why is it he in one place and why is it who in the other? So Rashi says, Inami Shabbat Shabbaton he. So Rashi understands, presumably, that the Shabbat Shabbaton that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov was referring to was maybe the first Shabbat Shabbaton. No, I'm not gonna. That can't be right. Let's just read the Rashi. I'm sorry, I've gone back and forth on this a few times. Inami Shabbat Shabbaton he lav Yoma ikre Shabbat. The day itself is not called Shabbat. Ela hachika amar. Menuchat margoa hi lachem. So, meaning that not that the day is called Shabbat Shabbaton, but this is descriptive of the day. This day is the day of Shabbat Shabbaton. It's a day of Menuchat Margoa. It's a day of relaxing rest. And it's just an emphatic, Shabbat Shabbaton, it's a day of relaxing rest. V'hechanami dichtiv Shabbat Shabbaton hu lashon zachar, af lashon menucha hu lashon zachar. This is the part I'm really not sure what he means here. In other words, so Rashi seems to be referring to the second. Oh wait, you raised your hand.
It's remarkable that one can do this. And it seemed
I've
that
never seen that before.
I just yes, lower hand. Now I can lower my hand. There we go. It would seem that sort of grammatically, the feminine pronoun would refer to the action, shvita, and the masculine would refer to the day, Shabbat. And so,
but we don't have. But the word shvita doesn't appear.
Or action like menucha.
Okay, so this is the problem. Menucha itself, in other words, these words don't actually appear. Menuchat margoa is Rashi's being mefaresh. She's saying Shabbat Shabbaton. I'll explain that to mean Menuchat margoa. V'hechanami dichtiv Shabbat Shabbaton hu lashon zachar, and so it's also written Shabbat Shabbaton hu, which is a lashon zachar, right? That's the second pasuk of Shabbat Shabbaton. Af lashon menucha hu lashon zachar. Also, the only way I can understand Rashi here is he's saying that in the second pasuk of Shabbat Shabbaton, in other words, we have Shabbat Shabbaton of Achrei Mot and Shabbat Shabbaton of Parshat Emor. Shabbat Shabbaton of Achrei Mot is called He. And I, Rashi, am explaining that to mean Menuchat Margoa, He Lachem. That this day, the Shabbat Shabbaton is Menuchat Margoa. V'hechanami dichtiv Shabbat Shabbaton hu lashon zachar, af lashon hu lashon zachar. The only way I can understand that is that he's saying that not that the lashon of Menucha per se is lashon zachar, because Menucha per se is a lashon nekeva. But I think what he means is that Shabbat Shabbaton could also be a lashon zachar. Aval Yoma lo ikre Shabbat. The day itself is not called Shabbat. It's just called. It's not called Shabbat Shabbaton. That's just descriptive of the day. Lahachi nakat tishbetu Shabbatchem yiteira. That's why the Torah added the words tishbetu Shabbatchem. Right. That's extra. Dehu gufe ikre Shabbat. That's to teach me what Rav Papa tells me, that it itself is called Shabbat. So this lashon here, it's a little unclear to me, and I'm sorry, I can't explain it any better than I explained it. I saw a comment from the Rashash on this, which I also didn't quite understand, but the basic understanding is I think, as I explained it. Yes, Michael Werner.
I'm really enjoying this function. Would this perhaps be, the distinction? Would this perhaps, this maybe is a little bit fanciful, but could this maybe be the distinction between Shemor and Zachor? That Zachar and somehow is related to Zachor?
That's very fanciful.
Oh,
It's not pertinent immediately in any way here, because what's pertinent is look, I'll say one more thing about this, and I think we should stop. The other what this reminds me of is in Sefer Dvarim. There's a pasuk that talks about a Sefer HaTorah Hazeh and Sefer Torah Hazot. The two psukim. So there you could say it's easier because Sefer is Lashon Zachar and Torah is Lashon Nekeva. So in the first one it says Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, it means the Sefer. It's referring to the Sefer. And the second one, Sefer HaTorah Hazot, it's referring to Torah, to the limud of the Torah. Here, Shabbat Shabbaton Hu and Shabbat Shabbaton He, I'm not sure, because maybe Shabbat is Lashon Nekeva and Shabbaton is Lashon Zachar. Yesh Lomar. And maybe that, and there also then that would be the basis for why the Torah says, that's a basis for the Torah saying it one way in one place, in one way, a different way in another place. It doesn't explain why it changes, why it refers to one instead of the other. And I have a feeling that somehow this is part of what Rashi is saying, but what he's seeing to, if what I just said is true, then what it would mean is that Shabbat Shabbaton He would mean that the first one is Lashon Menucha, but in Lashon Nekeva, and Shabbat Shabbaton Hu, the Shabbaton there is also a Lashon of Menucha, but it's Lashon Zachar. Maybe that's what Rashi means. I'm honestly not sure. But this is a good place to stop. And next week we'll look at the next part. So the next part is going. So at this point, let me just make a little summary here. So our basic question throughout has been, where is the Azara for Inui? So today we said Rav Acha Bar Yaakov learns it from Shabbat Shabbaton as a Gzeira Shavav to Shabbat Bereshit. Rav Papa learned it out from the words Tishbatu Shabbatchem, that Yom Kippur itself is called Shabbat, and so it has the trappings of Shabbat, which means it has Onish and Azara. And then we discussed why Rav Acha Bar Yaakov doesn't say like Rav Papa. And then Rashi discussed in greater detail why Rav Papa didn't use the pasuk of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Right? That's what we've done so far. What we also, so one of the things that we've learned out now is now we have a source. This is the first time in the Gemara that the Gemara brought a source for Tosefet Chol al Kodesh. Even though that wasn't our main topic, but now I learned it agav, because it's right. I needed to say why Rav Acha Bar Yaakov doesn't learn from Tishbatu Shabbatchem for what Rav Papa learns. He learns it for Tosefet Chol al Kodesh. So the next thing that the Gemara is going to talk about is, but wait a second, what about the Braita that we had earlier that talked about Tosefet Chol Kodesh? Right? So remember, that's the way Ravina ended up understanding the earlier Braita, that the Braita there was making Gzeira Shava based on etzem. So Tana de etzem hai b'tisha l'chodesh may avidle. That is, that Tana already assumed Tosefet Chol Kodesh. So he doesn't need this whole drasha of me'erav ad erev, etc. So what does he do with that pasuk? So that's what we'll look at next time. And there are a lot of questions here, but I'm going to stop. Any last questions, comments? Okay. Laila Tov. See you
Okay,
next
thank
week.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.